Let's talk. So there is a UN resolution that was voted on recently that Destiny and me, I think we disagree on. It has to do with Israel, Palestine, and the expansion of illegal settlements in the West Bank and the Golan Heights, which is an occupied part of Syria that Israel won after the 1967 war and then continued to defend, I believe, in the 1976 war. 1973 Yom Kippur War. It was used as a staging ground for attacking Israel in 1967. And so when Israel took it, and the fact that it's, you know, the Golan Heights, meaning it's a mountainous region, they could use it to as basically a buffer zone between Syria and Israel and prevent it from being used as a staging ground in the future. But in the process, 70,000 to 100,000 Syrians fled their home. A big tragedy for those Syrians who had to flee their home, had to leave everything behind, leaving a small, I think, Druze community that's left of like 20,000, maybe like 25,000 Druze that are left, and a very small, couple thousand Syrians. I think some have returned, but not many. Not many. Most have stayed away, and they have, you know, had another generation of people like in the rest of Syria or in what other country they went to afterwards. And so internationally, the Golan Heights is recognized as occupied territory. So is Palestine. And so what this resolution sought to do is to condemn Israeli settlements in occupied Palestinian territory. In East Jerusalem and the occupied Golan Heights. So this wasn't even necessarily, we are ordering Israel to give back the Golan Heights to Syria. This is not, we are ordering Israel to right now do a two-state solution. This was basically saying that the illegal Israeli settlements, which are often led by far-right maniacs, and if you want to see the type of ideology that a lot of the Israeli far-right settlers engage in, if you want to see like a little window into that, you know, describing their beliefs is one thing. I love sit-down interviews. That's what I love to do over here in Ukraine. And I also like written interviews. And one really good written interview that was done recently by Isaac Chaunter in The New Yorker is him talking to a West Bank settler about how they choose, you know, this woman chooses her children over Palestinian children, how she believes that the Palestinians in Gaza need to flee to Turkey and Egypt and the Sinai. And you should, I think, if you want to get an idea, like a good window into that ideology, this is a good interview to check out. I don't want to read it all though. It's like a full ass interview. You can go check it out on your own time. Point is though, this was a UN vote to condemn those illegal settlements. There are illegal settlements in the West Bank. There are illegal settlements in the Golan Heights as well. About 20 to 25,000 settlers have set up in the Golan Heights, replacing the 70,000 to 130,000 Syrians that fled the area. And so this was a simple condemnation of the settlements. That's what this was. And so it was overwhelmingly voted in favor of. You can see just the sea of green. Everyone from Zimbabwe to Yemen, Vietnam, the United Kingdom, Ukraine, Serbia, Slovakia, South Africa, Tajikistan, Thailand, South Korea, North Korea, Norway, Latvia, the Maldives, Malaysia, Mexico, Monaco, Jamaica, Belarus, Bahrain, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Australia, Albania, literally everyone from the worst human rights abusers to human rights defenders voted in favor of this. Actually, I don't think North Korea did. I think North Korea stayed neutral on this. There were a few countries that abstained, like Guatemala and Uruguay, but there were even less countries, only 7, that voted against. And those countries were Canada, Israel, Hungary, Viktor Orban's Hungary, Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, Nauru, and notably, as an American, the United States. We voted against it as well. Now, I disagreed with this, and I'll show you the tweet that I put out. My tweet was, you cannot expect anyone to take America seriously about upholding a rules-based international order if those rules don't apply to your allies. And so what I was thinking about here is something that was put very succinctly and I think very well by Michael Zeiger, who is a writer for a Russian, I think he's a managing editor for a Russian independent news outlet based in the Netherlands, that talks about how the Russians have changed their narrative about why they're fighting the war in Ukraine and how they're marketing it less as a denazification campaign. That stuff is still said a lot internally in Russia, but externally it's more about fighting American hegemony. It's more about fighting the West, removing the monopoly on the United States and its allies' use of force. And it's pointing in part to what's going on in Gaza, cynically, very cynically, and saying, look, we're seeing right now violations of international law. Oh, yeah. Oh, we respect the international borders of nation states. But what about the West Bank? What about Palestine? The people are stateless. Now, does Vladimir Putin actually care about this? Considering his longstanding relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu and considering his violations of international law in Ukraine, or his violations of international law in Georgia, or the violations of international law in Chechnya and Syria, wherever, no, I don't. I don't think after the Russian bombing campaign in Syria, where they openly bombed Syrian hospitals, they used UN data on Syrian hospitals to bomb them. I don't think he cares that much about the Israelis bombing a hospital. I don't think the same guy who bombed hospitals here, and I've been to the hospitals they've bombed, I don't think they care. But they're using it cynically. And even if many nation states understand that it's being used cynically, and they don't consider them like Russia, like their ideological ally, they could see them as an ally against that hypocrisy. That there's a hypocrisy that's being called out. And I think he puts it very well in this article. Thank God I got the subscription here. Yes, here it is. Russian whataboutism has gained traction not only at home, but also across the world for many countries outside of the West. The war in Ukraine is not a top priority, and the idea that is a struggle against American hegemony offers extra permission to stay engaged. For many in the global South, the fact that Putin destroyed the United States' monopoly on violence makes him, if not a hero, then at least a situational ally. And for many people, the war in Gaza, I think, is the epitome of that hypocrisy, of a people occupied for 70-something years, denied a state, made stateless, in horrible conditions. Now, this is not only due to the Israelis. Many Arab states do not take in the Palestinians, do not grant them citizenship. Lebanon, for example, doesn't do that. There's many other states like Turkey that is not doing that. And that's terrible. That's awful that 3 generations later, you're still stateless as a people. Terrible. So it's not completely Israel's fault, the condition of these people, but Israel certainly contributed. And with a continued illegal occupation, we look the other way here while calling it out in Ukraine. We look the other way on occupations when it's suitable to us to look the other way, and don't look the other way and call for the world to rally around the flag in Ukraine when it's not suitable, when it is suitable. When it's not suitable, we look the other way. When it is suitable, we look at the attack. We look at the violation of international law. Putting aside the specifics of this UN vote, which we're going to go into a moment, that hypocrisy is being viewed in the quote-unquote developing world. I don't like that phrase, but it is being talked about and viewed and seen at the developing world. And I think that they don't like it. And I think that makes them not believe the United States is genuine when it says it wants to stand for an international rules-based order, which is what we're saying when we stand up and defend Ukraine and defend what is their internationally defined borders. And I think that's wrong. I don't think we should be hypocritical. I don't think we should look hypocritical. And I don't think we should give people reasons to say, the system fucking sucks. It doesn't work anyway. Violate the laws. Let's just be honest with ourselves. Realism overdrive. I don't want that type of world. And I think when we engage cynically like this, that's the type of world we're creating. Now, let me steel man this a bit. Let me steel man. Okay, so I want to read what the actual legislation is, and then we're going to read what the United States had to say about it, because the United States didn't just vote against it and that's it. They had some commentary, as did other states, because they have UN representatives that could speak. By recording a vote of 145 in favor to 7 against, Canada, Hungary, Israel, Marshall Islands, with 18 abstentions. The committee approved the draft resolution titled Israeli Settlements in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and the occupied Syrian Golan Heights. By its terms, the assembly would condemn settlements activity. So this does nothing but condemn. I want to remind you guys, it's nothing but bad. That's all it is. In the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights, and any activities involving the confiscation of land, the disruption of the livelihood of protected persons, and the forced transfer of civilians and the annexations of land, whether through de facto or through national legislation. This, to be quite frank, is very milquetoast. It is just saying we condemn violations of international law. We condemn violations of international law and condemn Israeli expansion of settlements in occupied territory. It's very milquetoast, very milquetoast. The United States voted against it while most of its allies voted in favor of it. Let's see. For example, the representatives of Spain and most of the European Union voted in favor of it, but opened it up by saying there is no justification for terror and the use of civilians as human shields by Hamas. So they could go out of their way to clarify that if they wanted to. If America wanted to vote in favor of this and say, well, it's not the right moment, they could do what the Europeans did. But that's not what we did. This is what we said instead. The representatives of the United States said that when the current crisis ends, the situation must not go back to the pre-October 7th status quo in Gaza and the West Bank, one in which Hamas terrorizes Israelis and violent extremist settlers terrorize Palestinians in the West Bank. Okay, that's somewhat good. He underlines the need for a positive vision for what comes next, centered around a two-state solution that includes both Gaza and the West Bank and a viable Palestinian state. The United States is committed to supporting such a solution through constructive measures, but these draft resolutions do not contribute to the vision as they are deeply flawed and do not meet this moment. What the fuck does that mean? What is deeply flawed about them? Point out the flaw, because they seem to acknowledge that settler violence in the West Bank is out of control. What about it is flawed? Is the Golan Heights? Is that what's flawed? Is it the idea that what part of it? Nevertheless, the United States will continue to work with all parties to chart a future where Israelis and Palestinians have equal measures of security, freedom, justice, opportunity, and dignity, and where Palestinians can fully realize their legitimate right to self-determination and aspirations for a state of their own. So basically, they voted against condemning the Israeli settlement expansion, and instead just said it's bad when extremist settlers are violent and terrorize civilians in the West Bank, and then spent other time condemning Hamas and saying two-state solution. One of the number one barriers to peace, one of the bare minimums we're gonna have to get through in order to get peace between Israel and Palestine is dealing with the settler issue and stopping the settlers from expanding. That's like the bare minimum. As long as settler expansion continues, it's only going to be a linchpin, a point for tension. It's going to be a flare-up point. It is somewhere where violence can spiral out of, where some Palestinians get shot and then an intifada starts, or somebody loses their home and they go and engage in some violence that they shouldn't engage in, or there's some sort of terror attack. It's a linchpin for violence that perpetuates the conflict. It perpetuates the conflict and could eventually lead to the full annexation of the West Bank, which is the goal of many of the far-right Israeli settlers. Stopping it now is like the first step for anyone to take the Israeli position of trying to find peace here semi-seriously. It is illegal under international law. It has been illegal under international law for a very long time. This is not a new development, and they have been doing it for a very long time. Since they've had the territory, there have been settlers who have been trying to settle, and they have continued to expand. Condemning that is the bare minimum we can do. We're not making Israel remove the settlements. We're merely condemning it, and we couldn't meet that standard. While at the same time, our government condemns the Russians for taking over Ukrainian homes, taking over Ukrainian territory, and selling it off of settlers from the middle of Russia. Now, I understand that the conditions that created the two wars that led to this are different. The Golan Heights was used as a launching ground, for example. But at the end of the day, whether it was captured through that war, through a defensive war or an offensive war, taking territory from your opponent and then settling your own people there as the people who were living there before leave en masse is immoral, it's wrong, and it's illegal under international law. It's definitely since Israel unilaterally annexed the territory. And let me just mention, Israel unilaterally annexed the Golan Heights in the 80s. So it was years after the Yom Kippur War and years after the 1967 war.
Corrupt, bankrupt man.
So it wasn't something Israel had to do. Israel didn't have to unilaterally annex the Golan Heights. There were UN soldiers in the area. I think it was the, one second, I have it somewhere here. United Nations Disengagement Observer Force that divided Israeli forces and Syrian forces. It wasn't like they needed to annex it for security reasons. They had someone acting as a barrier between Israeli and Syrian troops. It was completely unnecessary. And if they're going to find a settlement, if they're going to find a settlement, a diplomatic settlement, they have to end the settlements. I have more to say, but I want to read Destiny's response. I don't want to just ramble and ramble and ramble. And when Destiny quote tweeted this and said, "These resolutions are stupid. None of the Arab states want them anyway. Palestinians and surrounding Arab states don't want Israel to leave the occupied territory. They want all of Israelis. They want all the Israelis to leave the Middle East." So, man, the first thing I want to say is that whether or not the Palestinians or the Arab states or surrounding Israel wants Israel to go into the ocean, Israel's not going into the ocean. They have a nuclear arsenal. They have the most modern military force in the region, the most effective military force in the region, bar none. They have a very effective air force. And they have a large amount of reserves that they can pull from, as in they have a population that is militarily involved, to say the least. Not to mention, they have very up-to-date military equipment. They are not reliant on the inaccurate rockets of many of their opponents. They have an air force that will make the airspace over both Gaza and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon completely uncontested if they were to go to war regionally. I do not believe that Israel's existence, as of right now, is under threat. And even if it was, I fail to see how a continued expansion of Israeli settlements protects Israel. I fail to see why condemning that is so difficult for the United States. If we're expecting the United States to make the Israelis give the concessions that are going to be necessary, or to get the concessions that are going to be necessary out of the Israelis in order to find a diplomatic settlement in the region, these are the bare minimums. The bare minimums is stopping settlement expansion. Because the more the settlements expand, the harder it's going to be to find a solution. Because it's going to be meaning the Israelis coming to the table, asking for more and more land in the West Bank, and possibly, if we're talking about the Syrians, just keeping the Golan Heights permanently, which seems to be Israel's intention. Now, there have been multiple times where Israel has said they are willing to give the Golan Heights back to the Syrians for peace. It depends on the administration. I don't think Benjamin Netanyahu would be willing to do that. But this is something that has been offered before, so it's not like it's such a crazy proposal that one day the Golan Heights will allow the Syrians that were displaced to return, and that territory could be returned back to Syria, whether the UN Observer Force would be expanded and the territory would be demilitarized to stop the area from being used as a launching ground again, whether it would we would see the airspace controlled by Israel for like a decade or two in some type of period that eases in the Syrians taking back over the territory, especially considering that Bashar Assad is in power. And I would understand people saying we got to wait until the Syrian civil war is resolved and maybe wait until that Bashar Assad is brought to justice. I don't know. But if settlers are continuing to settle in the Golan Heights, that diplomatic solution, that diplomatic end is going to be impossible. It's going to be impossible. There is no reason to continue settlement expansion whatsoever. Why? Why is it so bad to condemn that? Now, if you want to say that these things are meaningless because it's non-binding, that's one thing. But there's no reason for the United States to stand on the international stage outside of just patting Israel on the back. There's no reason for us to stand on the international stage and say, we stand with this a war crime, which is not what they're saying. To be clear, they're not saying we stand with this war crime. We stand with this violation of international law. So I got to give them credit for that. But there's no reason for them to not take the extra step, which is we condemn the illegal settlements, especially if we all acknowledge that that's going to be the first step for the Israelis to find any diplomatic solution. Why make ourselves look hypocritical on the world stage? Why undermine our claim to standing for an international rules-based order? What's the purpose? Why? Is it just to please the Israelis? What about our image in the rest of the Arab world? What about our image when it comes to the standards that we hold other nation states to, but don't hold ourselves to? One of the biggest critiques of the American-led system, one of the biggest critiques of the liberal internationalist, of the, international rules-based order system, is that the rules apply to thee, but not to me. Is that the rules apply to Saddam Hussein, the rules apply to Muammar Gaddafi, the rules apply to America's enemies, but the rules doesn't apply to the United States. And this is no better, I think, shown than the International Criminal Court, where we're providing the International Criminal Court with evidence of Vladimir Putin's crimes in Russia. We're providing them with evidence, crimes in Ukraine, to try to build the case against him while continuously not being a member state to the International Criminal Court and having the Hague Invasion Act on the books, meaning we can take our military, go to the Hague, and bust out any of our boys if they get arrested. That's real, was introduced by the Bush administration, and both the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and the Biden administration kept it all on the books. But if one of our enemies gets captured for war crimes, we will provide all the evidence in the world and we'll clap along the way. That hypocrisy makes people and countries trying to choose which system they want to align with, which values they want to align with, whether or not the international rules-based order is something that should be pursued, or if it's a naive pipe dream or being used cynically by the Americans to perpetuate their own interests. That is going to make them think, well, maybe we do need situational allies. Maybe we do need someone to challenge American hegemony and power. And that's how you get to the multipolar crowd. That's how you get to the people cheering for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I'm not saying that America shouldn't be challenged in some way on the international stage. It's just I want those things challenging the Americans on the international stage to be within the bounds of international law, to be within the bounds of an international rules-based order that prevents war crimes, that prevents atrocities, that prevents imperialism, colonialism, etc. Wars for land grabs. But the first step for us not looking hypocritical in this instance, the first step for us also finding a diplomatic solution, is to at very least say, stop settlement expansion, period. Everywhere. Golan, West Bank, period. You could say the resolution doesn't do much. You could say the resolution doesn't solve anything. It's just like a bunch of words. But that's a general problem with the UN and how the UN is set up with the UN Security Council. It's a general problem with how interventions with the UN work. I still think that making America's stance known, showing that we don't give Israel free reign to do literally anything they want to do, this was a good opportunity to do that, and we failed. And it looks like we're just giving Israel carte blanche to expand settlements. That's what it looks like. And we're one of 7 nations, of 3, and I don't mean to be mean, of 3 semi-significant nations, and I'm not trying to downplay the importance of Micronesia. I do kind of want to throw a little bit of shade of Hungary, if I'm being completely honest. But look at this scorecard, man. Look at this scorecard. This does not look like a victory for the international rules-based order. It just looks hypocritical. Oh, also, I saw people in the reply saying that the Golan Heights is Israeli territory. It was annexed, not occupied. Unilaterally annexing territory does not make it like your territory under international law. That's not how it works. If that's how it works, then that means like Kherson is Russian and Zaporizhia is Russian, Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimea is Russian. If that's all it takes is unilateral annexation, then all that territory is Russian. It's silly. That's a silly standard to I think work by internationally. We got Destiny fans in here. We got Destiny fans in here. Am I being unfair I don't think I'm being unfair. I have a feeling if I sat down with Destiny, we'd probably end up agreeing on the things we're saying. Because I've heard him say before that he's not in favor of settlement expansion. So I just don't understand why we would not vote against settlement expansion. I just don't understand. I just ooh.